Well, hello, I'm Renee Williams,
And I'm Billy Thomas.
and welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. We have a lot in store for you today.
Yeah, Renee, I'm really excited about today's show, and I'm so glad everyone can join us. If you're joining us via Zoom, you can use the chat feature to interact with us. And if you're on Facebook Live, please use the comments section. But Renee, today we've got a brand new guest who's not been on our show before, Dr. Chris Barton. Dr. Barton's a professor here in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources, and he's a watershed expert, but he's going to be talking about reclaimed mine land. And he's got this great group called Green Forest Works, so I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that and some of the great work that team is doing as well. So I'm really excited to hear from Dr. Barton here soon. We also have Dr. Crocker. So she has initiated this new program that's really getting a lot of attention, and we're really excited about it. She's actually got a bounty out for some of these invasive trees that are causing us some grief, and one in particular. But we'll save that and let Dr. Crocker kind of unveil that. And then we have with us, as always, Laurie Thomas. Laurie has got a tree of the week. This is kind of a cool little tree, and we'll look forward to seeing that. But again, thank you all so much for being with us today.
Yeah, and remember, as always, if you have questions, type them in the chat pod and we will get them to the presenters. So speaking of presenters, let's go ahead. So Dr. Barton, if you can turn on your camera. Hi, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me today.
I'm glad to have you with us.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about today.
Well, what I wanted to talk about today is a topic that's in the news a lot these days. It's climate change and environmental restoration. So talk a little bit about how we're utilizing reforestation and tree planting projects to help mitigate climate change.
Excellent. I look forward to seeing it. And folks, again, just interact via the chat pod or the comment section on Facebook, and we'll get to those questions.
Take it away.
All right. Okay, so as I mentioned, I wanted to talk today about reforestation opportunities in mining regions of the world. And this talk really starts with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that reported that an increase of 1 billion hectares of forest on Earth could limit global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2050. And by limiting to that, we could potentially prevent a climate crisis. So when we think about 1 billion hectares of forest on Earth, that relates to about 1 trillion trees. And so the question becomes, where are we going to plant these 1 trillion trees? So there are certain places on Earth where we're not going to plant trees, like existing forests or deserts or polar ice caps, although they might be possible in the future. We also have global issues with food security. So we really wouldn't want to think about converting productive agricultural fields into forests. Urban areas also provide some opportunities for planting trees, and we certainly could add more trees to urban areas. But when we're thinking about, 1 million or trillion trees, that's kind of limiting in those areas. And lastly, we might think about urban wildland interfaces or suburban areas to plant trees. And with the recent outbreaks of wildfires in places like the Western United States and Australia, even those areas have limitations as far as large tree planting projects. So this group Baston out of Zurich conducted a study that was published in Science in 2019, and they looked at using GIS and remote sensing to locate places on the Earth where we can plant trees that excluded current forests, deserts, productive farmland, cities, and suburban areas. And they actually located almost 1 billion hectares. It was something like 0.9 billion hectares. And those areas that they identified were primarily in marginal agricultural land and disturbed areas. And when I was reading that paper, I noticed that 2 of the locations that they identified that had some of the highest potential for reforestation were the temperate forest of America's South and East and the tropical east coast of Australia. And I saw these 2 areas, and the light bulb went off in my head because I'm very familiar with these 2 areas. And they have something very common between the 2 of these areas. Both of these areas are heavily mined for coal. Here's a picture of a site in Pike County, Kentucky. That is a coal mine. This is the Bent Mountain Mine in Pike County, Kentucky. And here's a picture of the Wambo Mine in the Hunter Valley of Australia. Now, if we go back and look at these again, what do they have in common? One, it's a very disturbed area, but two, if you look on the edge of the mine, it's forested. Let's go back to Australia, look on the edge of the mine, it's forested. And it turns out that much of the mining regions of the world were forests prior to the mining. So to me, this is a picture of Appalachia. It's a biodiversity hotspot for the temperate region of the world. We know it to be very dissected and mountainous and high diversity of hardwood tree species and very beautiful. And so this is what I've seen in Appalachia might look like prior to mining. Here's during the mining process where they're taking the top of the mountain off and going down to a coal seam, extracting that coal seam. Blasting this rock between these two coal seams, and all of this gets pushed into a valley. So a very destructive process to extract that resource. And here's what much of the mining region of Appalachia looks like after the mining is done. And there are several things that I'd like to point out in this picture. One is the topography of the landscape is greatly changed. We went from very steep, dissected mountains to flat to gently rolling. Another thing that we see in this picture is we started off with a forested environment, and we're left with primarily a grassland or shrubland environment after the mining. And it's that mining process that actually keeps these lands in this sort of grassland, shrubland state for a long period of time. And we refer to this as a state of arrested succession. And essentially, the lands are compacted so that they don't erode and we don't have landslides. And they use often exotic, sometimes invasive grass species to green up these sites. And it creates a situation that when you do go in and plant the trees, the compaction and the competition from the vegetation that is planted there outcompete our native forest trees. So what we see is in the Appalachian region is a large scale land use change from forested to sort of a grassland, shrubland state. And in fact, in Appalachia, we did a GIS study and found that there are about 700,000 hectares of surface mines that have been bond released, and another 300,000 that are currently being permitted for mining. So that's 1 million hectares of land. And that's an area bigger than the state of Delaware, bigger than the state of Rhode Island, and nearly as big as those two states, combined together. So it's a pretty, significant issue in the Eastern United States. And it creates a lot of issues with wildlife and forest fragmentation, but also other associated issues with water quality and soil quality, etc. So here's an opportunity. We have, 1 million hectares of land in the Appalachia region that could be utilized for reforestation to help mitigate climate change. But there are some obstacles to, reforesting these lands. One is they're highly disturbed. The original soil is often buried, and the seed bank and the beneficial mycorrhizae and bacteria and things like that are buried under hundreds of feet of spoil material. There's lots of physical and chemical limitations to what ends up being the topsoil substitute or the soil that we would plant into. I've already mentioned there's a lot of compaction, but there's also chemical limitations with regards to low nutrients and pH limitations in some cases. These sites are known for having water issues and lots of habitat issues associated with these. So when we think about these sort of large scale ecological restoration projects, we have to consider all of these obstacles in our planning. So one of the first experiments that was done to look at reforestation potential on mine lands was conducted by folks here in the Forestry Department in the late 1990s at the Starfire Mine near Hazard, Kentucky. And what they did was sort of to look at this issue of compaction. And so they asked the mining company to go out and reclaim a site like they thought that they should, as per specified by the law. And then they asked them to do the same thing again, but the last 6 to 8 feet of material, just take your dump truck of rocks and dump those rocks in really closely abutted piles right next to each other. And then go up on top of those piles and knock the tops of them off. We call this strike off reclamation. And use it only 1 or 2 passes to knock the tops of those piles off. And what you have is, your site is stabilized, but on top of that, you have about 6 feet of uncompacted material. And often I refer to this as, similar in a garden to a raised bed, if you will. And they went into this raised bed and into these conventionally reclaimed sites and planted 7 different species of trees. And after 20 years, we found that on the conventional reclamation, we had about 20% survival. And much of that survival was attributed to just one species, white ash. And now that's even gone because of the emerald ash borer. But on the low compaction reclamation treatment, we saw about 75% survival, which was really good. But more importantly, those few trees that did survive on the conventional reclamation were statistically below what we would expect a regenerating forest to be, of the same age. So they were shorter and their diameters were less. But the low compaction reclamation technique, we found growth rates to be very similar, statistically similar to regenerating forests of the same age. So we had good survival and the growth form was similar to what we would expect in a regenerating forest that had been logged or disturbed by some other activity. So those were planted in 1996. Here we are 18 years later. The trees are about 40 feet tall. You have canopy closure, 2016. And here we are in 2019. So these areas that were experimental have turned into a forest. And thus we demonstrated that if we can alleviate the compaction on these sites, we have a chance of putting these forests back on these lands. Another project that we did was at the University of Kentucky's Robinson Forest. This is Guy Cove. It was mined in the late 1990s. This is a valley fill. So they took the top of the mountain off and pushed it into this valley. There's about 150 feet of material burying a headwater stream in this particular watershed. So we went in and looked at a project to see if there was a way that we could actually, 1, reforest the watershed, but 2, create a stream on this valley fill. So in 2009, we started a project where we dug out about 150,000 cubic yards of material and redistributed it in the landscape of this watershed. We also dug in a new stream to replace the one that was buried. And here we are 8 years later, the stream was active. We have water moving through it. The water quality is good. It's been repopulated with aquatic macroinvertebrates and salamanders are using the site. And as you can see, the forest is starting to come back in this site very nicely. Here's a picture in 2019. So 10 years later, and we have canopy closure in that area. And we basically created a new aquatic ecosystem in this mined landscape. So again, before and after. So some pretty dramatic results we're seeing, 10 years later after we initiate these types of projects. So based upon the success of some of these research efforts, we thought, maybe there's an opportunity to develop an economic and environmental program for Appalachia surrounding the reforestation and restoration of these lands that have been impacted by surface mining. So we thought of this project as a regenerative economy. So using equipment that is used in the mining operation, repurposing some of that equipment, creating jobs for out of place coal miners. So we created this Green Forest Work program with the idea of, perhaps going back and restoring, forest on these reclaimed grass and shrub lands. And this program, was intended to stimulate the economy, improve the environment, plant millions of trees on thousands of hectares of barren mine land, create much needed green jobs in Appalachia, and empower citizens to sort of restore their landscape and put it back into a better state than it was after the mining. So why is this important now? Well, when we look at the economic status of Appalachia, you see in red here are listed by the Appalachian Regional Commission as the most economically distressed counties in the region. And as you can see, a lot of the economically distressed, so this is the lowest 15% of economies in the United States are located in Eastern Kentucky and southwestern West Virginia. And this is where much of the mining has occurred. And how are we gonna, create these jobs? Well, one is just through compaction mitigation. So we need to go out there and get rid of the soil compaction that will allow those trees to grow. And as I stated earlier, there's lots of infrastructure, lots of heavy equipment in that area, and lots of operators that could be contracted to go out and do this type of work. There's also other opportunities to create jobs. There's native seed collection, nurseries and greenhouses to grow that seed, paying people to plant the trees, monitoring and maintenance of these new forests, training opportunities, like in this bottom corner here, this is the Appalachian Conservation Corps. We hire these people to come in every summer and do work on our projects. And then in the future, there's potentially opportunities for timber and non-timber products, recreation activities, and more we're seeing interest in these type of projects for carbon credits. So lots of opportunities to build local economies around these restoration activities. So we started Green Forest Work in 2009. And since that time, we've had about 1,500 different partner organizations working with us. We've had over 20,000 volunteers come out and spend, their spring break or whatever in Appalachia planting trees. And thus far, we've planted 4 million trees from this particular program. And those 4 million trees have related to about $10 million that have been put back into local economies in the Appalachian region. So we do have a lot of this time of year spring break students from colleges from all over the United States who've come to Appalachia to participate in some of these service community projects, and again to sort of empower them to do something about preserving the environment. It's one thing to donate some money or support somebody, but to go out and physically do it yourself, I think, is a very empowering experience for these young people. So when you're planting trees on a mine land, we take all the help we can get. And so over the years, we've blessed the ground, we've blessed the trees, we've serenaded the trees, we've even toasted the trees. And our impact is pretty widespread. We have projects now from upper part of Pennsylvania all the way down into Alabama on coal mine lands. And so our momentum is growing. I mentioned that we've already planted 4 million trees, but in 2022, we're going to plant 2 million. And it looks like 2023, we might be 3 or 4 million trees. So there's lots of stories that happen on these sites too that are empowering for individuals as well. And this is a picture of Deborah Bodley, and she was the mother of Dora, who was the youngest youngest person on the Flight 93 National Memorial, not on the National Memorial, on the Flight 93, which actually came to rest at a site in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, that was an old coal mine, an old surface mine, about 1,000-acre mine. And in 2013, we started planting trees on this site. One, to just beautify the coal mine, but also to invite people who had stories or affiliations with the passengers on the Flight 93. And so Deborah was there that day, and this little hemlock, eastern hemlock tree that we have here was taken from a seed at Gettysburg and grown in a nursery. And the idea was to connect those two Pennsylvania battlefields. And so Deborah and I planted this little hemlock tree, and she told me afterwards it was the best she had felt since the day, Flight 93 happened, September 11th. And a sort of a saying arose out of planting this tree, and it was heal the land, heal the heart. And Deborah was really sort of moved by this activity, and she actually has moved from California to around the Shanksville area just so that she could participate more in these types of projects. So since we started working at the Flight 93 Memorial, we've now planted about 150,000 trees on that site. Here's that same little hemlock last year, has a little bit of deer browse on the bottom of it, but it's coming along nicely. So several years back, we participated in the UN's Billion Tree Project. And this was a project to plant one tree for every person on the planet. And at the time that was, 7 billion trees, I think. And I was asked to be on a panel with some folks to talk about the Billion Tree Project. And I stated, when it was my turn to talk, that although the forestry reclamation approach, or FRA, is a regional reforestation model, it can be utilized on any land affected by surface coal mining and thus has global application. And I said that, and I was, thinking, okay, the fundamentals of soil science and plant science and hydrology and ecology should transfer. Yeah, the weather will be different and, different tree species and things like that, but it should be transferable. So I made this statement, and this is Prince Albert of Monaco, and he came up after the event and said, I'd like to see you, try this elsewhere. And so I did, and I decided to take it to Australia. As I noted in that first slide, another area where there's a lot of impacts to the landscape because of coal mining. And so the forest in Australia is a lot different than the forest in Eastern Kentucky, say. It's more savanna-like. The trees don't get nearly as big. And this is a typical, picture of the bush. And so, very similar practices. We went to this Wambo mine next to the Wallamai National Forest. And I thought it was important to do something that was adjacent to forested land, just to demonstrate that the site was forested prior to the mining. We went in and did site preparation activities just like we would in Appalachia, ripping up the land. And we planted native tree species for that area. And a few years later, I went back, and sure enough, just like the results we were having in Appalachia, we see that these sites are returning very nicely. And I was there in 2019 and took a picture, and it's really starting to look like the bush. It's getting that sort of savanna appearance, and the trees are doing very well. So we're sort of expanding our efforts in the Australian region. We planted 330,000 trees in the last 2 years, which was quite a challenge during COVID. And several of these projects are on mines, but we're also looking at riparian restoration for reducing sediment to the Great Barrier Reef, which is also having issues associated with climate change, and some abandoned agricultural land for carbon credits. One of the things that we've been doing there, just like we've done here in the United States, is involved, school kids and things like that to come out and plant. But we've also been working with some training programs with indigenous planting crews and seed collection. So involving the traditional owners in these projects. So with that, I'll wrap this talk up, and I just would like to, share with you all this quote by Wangari Maathai, who won the Nobel Prize in 2004 for work in Kenya to do tree planting and environmental restoration and empowering women to participate in this. And she was really kind of inspirational for some of the work that we started here in the United States and elsewhere. And she said that the act of planting a tree reconnects the human spirit to the beauty and importance of the natural world, the basis for all life on earth. And I think that's really the heart of what we're trying to do is reconnect the human spirit to the natural world, and do that through planting trees. So Green Forest Work is part of this movement to plant 1 trillion trees over the next decade. This is the 1t.org program. Look it up. We're also being recognized by the United Nations for their decade on ecosystem restoration. So two sort of global programs to promote reforestation and ecosystem restoration are happening in this decade. So I urge you to, get involved, get out there and plant some trees. You can look us up at greenforestwork.org. If you're interested in participating in a planting event, let us know. We'll be having many over the next couple of months. Until about mid-May, we do a lot of our tree planting. So I'll stop now and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. What a great way to, heal the land and trees, and sounds like healing some hearts as well. So that's wonderful.
I know that was moving there, Dr. Barton. Really appreciate that presentation. And Renee, some of those pictures, that Starfire Mine he was showing, that's where I got to do some of my master's work. So
that's right.
Really neat. But Dr. Barton, what you all are doing is really impressive and has such huge implications. I can't thank you enough for sharing with our audience today.
And it's really a time to be thinking about, reforestation, as we don't really have a lot of great solutions for climate change mitigation, but this is one that's tangible and one that I think that we can do. And I saw somebody had a question about American chestnuts. We have been planting a lot of American chestnuts on these mine sites, and there's a good reason we do that, and it involves the soil itself. And although the soil on these mine lands isn't great, we know that initially it doesn't have some of the plant pathogens that have been, detrimental to the American chestnut restoration project, in particular this Phytophthora cinnamomai. And so the sites on the mine lands tend to be, kind of like a white oak type of site. They're open, they're high in elevation, and that would have been also a good site for American chestnut. So the soil conditions are actually pretty good for that. And so we have been working with TACF. We probably planted, I would say, 50,000 of their backcross trees on different mines throughout the Appalachian region. We have a big experiment in Pike County where we looked at 4 different varieties of chestnuts, and those trees now are about 13, 14 years old, and they're producing chestnuts. And that's one of the other ideas is there's so many mines around the Appalachian region. If we can establish these chestnuts on those, that becomes a great sort of vector for dispersal of this species. So, we'll keep chugging away at that.
Yeah, there was another question too about what tree species did you plant in Appalachia? I know you mentioned chestnut. What others were there?
Right. So what we try to do is plant whatever is native to that sort of local region. So in Kentucky, we plant an oak hickory forest type, usually, 13 to 20 different species. So you'll have yellow poplar and maple, white oak, red oak, black walnut, a couple of hickory species. And then we usually do some understory species like dogwood and hawthorn and hazelnut and redbud. So we try to mix up, the species as much as we can. We don't plant, things that are going to seed in on their own, like, cherry and sycamore and things like that have light seed that can move in on their own. In other areas like high elevation of West Virginia, we're planting a red spruce ecosystem type. So red spruce and aspen and maple, and a lot of that project we have there, we have like 50 different species we're planting. When we get down into Alabama, we can get into some of the southern pine species. So really what we're trying to do is bring back the native ecosystem and not plant, a monoculture or anything like that. So whatever is local for that area is what we're going to try to plant.
Someone just asked, where do you source your seedlings from?
So again, since this is sort of an economic program, what we try to do is source the seedlings from local nurseries and local greenhouses. So we want that sort of genetic provenance of that area, but we also want to support these local greenhouses and local nurseries. So we probably worked with, I would say 40 different nurseries and greenhouses across the region. And so a lot of the state nurseries too, like the Morgan County Nursery here in Kentucky, the Clements Nursery in West Virginia, we utilize those as well. But sometimes when we're looking for species that are not real common, we have to reach out to these, smaller greenhouses that actually collect their own seed from the local area. And so we've really developed a lot of relations with these people and actually sent them seed to grow for us and whatnot. And this is really this is a good question, because one of the big challenges that we're facing as these global reforestation projects are becoming more common is seedling availability. And just about every nursery that we work with this year ran out of seedlings, because there's so many groups like MasterCard, who has 100 million, tree planting campaign for the decade, and Amazon is, planting all these trees, and Microsoft and Shell. And so these big corporations are doing these sort of corporate sustainability, corporate responsibility projects, and they're all surrounding reforestation. So one of the things we really need to do is, support our nurseries and actually encourage them to, seed more trees out there.
Well, trees are the answer, right?
No matter what the question.
Yes, trees are the answer. Dr. Barton, real quick. So if we've got a landowner or somebody and they've got some reclaimed mine land on their property and it's like a savanna like you showed before, kind of how do we kind of get them connected with you, or what's the best approach or advice would you have for folks?
Right. Yeah. And so we're actively looking for, places to, put these projects in. And we do a lot of fundraising to, pay for these. And yes, we definitely want to work with local landowners who are interested in bringing back the forest on their land. And really the best way to get a hold of us is just, go to our website, and there's, we have a section in there for landholders, to give us a call, and we can, hopefully work on a project together.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Outstanding presentation, great information. I hope it gets spread from here far and wide, and they help get us toward that 1 trillion tree number. So
there you go.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, thank you again for joining us today.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Right.
Wow. Very cool, Renee.
Moving on. Now we've got some trees that are wanted, not by the FBI, but still wanted.
No, Ellen, I saw something on the local news about some bounty program you started. What's going on?
Oh, yes. So I don't know if these trees are wanted in the sense that they're desired,
Exactly.
but they are wanted in the sense that we're trying to help people identify them in the yard and then I guess this, upgrade them, improve the trees that they have.
Go native, yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our Bradford Pear Bounty Program that we are just starting up with a range of partners. And this is a pilot program. We got the idea from some neighboring states like South Carolina that have been doing this for a while and have seen it as a great way both to engage people about the problem of invasive plants, but also the incredible value of our native species. So we are inviting you and people across Kentucky to participate, cut down your Bradford pear, take a selfie with it, and get a free native tree that's going to be a better tree for your landscape long-term on a number of levels. So, as we're talking about this and we're talking about Bradford pear, the question could be, why are we doing this? Who cares about Bradford pear? It's this kind of nice tree in your landscape, no big deal. But there are a couple things about it that make it a problem. And when this tree was first introduced, it was kind of promoted as the perfect tree. It's got this nice round form. It has pretty white flowers in the spring, and it was subsequently planted all over the place. So you have neighborhoods and areas where it's just 100% Bradford pear, right? And what's the problem with that? Well, to start with, they don't last as long and perform as well as people thought when they put them in. Hindsight is 2020, and yes, they have glossy leaves and they grow rapidly, but they also fall apart fast. So this is what you can expect, or maybe what you've grown familiar with if you have Bradford pear in your yard, is that when it comes to our ice storms or other winter storms or major weather events, their branching structure is such that they're going to fall apart fast. And really, there are better selections long-term for your landscape that you'll be happier with, that will last. In addition, another major problem is that when they were first promoted, the idea was that these pear trees were sterile. They produced seeds, but their seeds wouldn't go anywhere or do anything. However, since then, it has been discovered that that is not the case at all. Those Bradford pear might be sterile with other Bradford pear, but Bradford is just one cultivar of the species calorie pear. There are many different cultivars out there, so you might have heard of Aristocrat or Chanticleer or other cultivars of flowering pear. These are actually the same species, and that species is also used as a rootstock for other pears. And so while a Bradford pear might be sterile with a Bradford pear, it's not the case with other calorie pears. So instead of having sterile seeds, what you see is it popping up everywhere. If you're in central Kentucky or northern Kentucky, you are already well aware of this site. In the spring, it's one of the first things to flower. And if you look in your old fields, your roadsides, they are just full of flowering pear, of calorie pear. And if you live in other areas, you might also be starting to see this pop up, because as those ornamental pears were planted all through the landscape, they are not staying put, and they are moving out from there into our natural areas. And why is this a problem? Well, it looks pretty. So, I think a lot of people might see it in the spring and like it, but those pears are kind of taking up the space that what you'd like to see there are your native trees. We talked about the importance of native tree species with Dr. Barton just a moment ago. If instead of getting the establishment of those native species that you want to see, that long-term are going to turn into these valuable forests, you just get a sea of calorie pear, that's going to set you back. That's going to prohibit that from happening. In addition, these calorie pear, these wild calorie pear that pop up, have some pretty significant thorns on them. Not only does that make that really unpleasant to walk around in, those pears are super dense and they're covered with thorns. You're not going to be enjoying that space the same way that you could, but you can pop equipment, pop tires on different pieces of equipment. So another thing to consider with that calorie pear. So if you've got Bradford pear in your landscape, we invite you to register for our Bradford pear Pear Bounty Program that's being hosted at the Franklin County Extension Office. And we have a couple different dates, one during the week and one during the weekend on March 12th and March 17th. And again, if you go online to our registration, you'll be able to sign up to say that you're going to cut down a Bradford pear or another calorie pear. And then in exchange for showing us a picture of that, you can get a native tree seedling that's going to be a better fit long term. There are lots of fantastic local partners that are leading this charge there in Franklin County. From the Remove Invasives Partnership of Franklin County to the Franklin County Extension Office to others. And this is all made possible by their great work on the ground. And while this is open to everyone across the state, there are some special perks for those Franklin County residents. You'll have access to some different trees due to some donations there. And there's even a prize for the biggest calorie pear cut down. The biggest tree cut down, the person who submits that can receive a voucher for a bald and burlapped tree. So please do check this out online and register, sign up for one of those dates. And if you like this program, if you like this idea, but you don't live near Franklin County, don't worry. Hopefully soon there'll be another program coming your way before too long. Because what I can tell with this program is that there has been so much excitement, so many people who maybe recognize, oh shoot, I had that Bradford pear, I planted that tree and I wish I hadn't. And so hopefully this will be a way to tap into some of that.
Definitely. So, we did have a question if there was one in Powell County. So I know this is going to be a constant question.
Yes. What about my county, Ellen?
Yeah, when's it coming to my county?
And if you're interested, we've really benefited from other states that have these programs, who have shared their resources and what has worked for them. I'm looking at you, South Carolina, thank you. But if you're interested in your county and you're like, we could really use this, reach out to your county extension office, get some local support, and we will do everything in our power to make it happen, because I'd love to see this across the state. Not only is Bradford pear not the best tree, but I think the more important message here is that there are lots of fabulous native trees that you could use that will be better for you and your landscape, better for the environment, last longer, support more insects and more wildlife. So, just an excuse to get more natives in our landscapes.
Yay, way to go.
And I think the one thing, Ellen, is for people when they do cut their tree down, don't bring that to you. I think we've had a couple of questions of people going, how am I going to fit this in my truck? Well,
I don't need to see that. Well, I do need to see it. I'd love to see a picture of it. So take a selfie, a tree fee, perhaps. But when you register, you'll register for, we have a maximum number of trees you can register it for. It's 5 bare root seedlings, or for those Franklin County residents, 2 container grown seedlings. And, we don't need your trees, but we would love to see you posing victoriously next to them. And this is not the world's best time in the year to treat those cut stumps with herbicide, but it's certainly something you could come back and do, because especially with your smaller trees, just cutting it down might not be enough, because it's probably going to sprout right back up. So that's something you're going to want to keep an eye out for. And if you have any questions about that, we've got some great resources about how to not just cut down your tree, but to kill that calorie pear.
Hope you're wildly successful with this, right?
Yeah. And if you are in an area and this is going to be inconvenient for you, but you've got a Bradford pear that you'd rather replace with a better tree, don't let it stop you. Go ahead and cut that tree down now, a nice basil pruning. And I bet there's going to be some great local tree giveaways in your area this spring that you could find a much better fit.
Yes, excellent, excellent. Really cool, Ellen. It is a great project and effort. And like I said, I hope every county picks it up that needs it.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for getting the word out about it.
Good deal. All right. Really cool. So we try to have, as often as we can, Laurie Thomas present one of her trees of the week. And hey, Laurie, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So you got us another tree this week?
I sure do. And I just want to say, I know Dr. Crocker's program, if you got a Bradford pear, do what you can to get rid of it. Yeah, it's a good idea. They were a bane of our existence in parks. So yeah, absolutely. So this week it's a native tree. We focus on native trees in the tree of the week. And this week we've got box elder. And some of you may see this tree and not realize this is one of our maple trees here in the state. So here we go. Here's box elder.
I'm Laurie Thomas with the University of Kentucky Forestry and Natural Resources Extension, and I'm here with the tree of the week, the box elder. Acer negundo is one of the most widespread of the maples. It is the only maple with compound leaves. The maple family is comprised of 2 genera, and the Acer genus includes approximately 200 species, mostly found in the northern hemisphere. There are 13 maples native to the United States, with 7 found in Kentucky. Box elder is also known as ashleaf maple and box elder maple. This deciduous tree is fast-growing and short-lived, typically living 75 to 100 years. It is a medium-sized tree that can grow 60 feet tall. It typically has poor growth form with multiple trunks and numerous sprouts along the trunk. It is considered weed-like by some, but it is of moderate importance to wildlife for food and cover. The leaves of this tree can be confused with poison ivy. Box elder is found from Canada and south to Texas, with populations in Central America. It is found in almost all counties in Kentucky. This tree is typically found in riparian inland wetland communities, and its best development is in the bottomlands of the lower Ohio and Mississippi River valleys. However, it is tolerant of a variety of soils and moisture regimes, and because of this tolerance, it has been widely planted in the Great Plains as a windbreak. In disturbed areas, it can be an aggressive pioneer tree, and stump and root sprouts are common from young, vigorous trees. Box elder is classified as shade tolerant, but is less so than other soft maples. Box elder is a deciduous tree with oppositely arranged compound leaves, as you can see in the photo. The leaves are pinnately compound with 3 to 5 leaflets, sometimes 7, and they're about 2 to 4 inches long. The leaflet margins are coarsely serrated and sometimes lobed. The shape of the leaflets often resemble the classic maple leaf. They are light green above and paler below, and fall color isn't showy and the leaves just turn a dull yellow and drop off. This species is dioecious, meaning 2 houses, so there are male trees and female trees. The male flowers are in yellow-green drooping racemes with light brown stamens, and they kind of look like wispy tassels. The female flowers are more reddish-green and also hang in drooping racemes. The flowers bloom with or just before the leaves emerge, and the flowers are wind-pollinated. The fruit is a paired samaras that are typically V-shaped with slightly divergent wings. They are 1 to 1.5 inches long and are in drooping clusters. When they ripen in the fall, they are light brown. Samaras can persist through the winter, and trees begin seed production as early as 8 years, and trees generally produce seed every year. Seeds are wind dispersed from autumn through the following spring. The bark is thin, light brown to gray with shallow interlacing ridges on mature trees. On the younger trees, the bark appears green, turning light brown to gray, often with a warty appearance. The wood is soft with straight, close grain. Growth rings are usually faint and non-distinct. The wood is rated as having poor durability to perishable, and the wood's overall strength is low. The sapwood tends to be pale white, sometimes yellowish, and the heartwood is grayish to yellow-brown, and it frequently has red or pink streaks. The red staining is thought to be caused by a compound the tree produces for self-defense when wounded. Wood with this coloration is often called flame. Box elder is of moderate importance to wildlife. Many species of birds, such as evening grosbeak, as well as small mammals such as squirrels, feed on the seeds. The foliage of the young shoots are browsed by mule and white-tailed deer. Box elder, as well as other maples, support the imperial moth larva. The box elder bug lays its eggs on all maples and clusters in the bark, but it seems to prefer box elder. These bugs are eaten by a variety of small rodents and mammals. It also provides cover for wildlife, which can be important, especially in the Great Plains, where there is seldom quality wildlife cover. This tree may be toxic to livestock. Since the wood is light, soft, and has low strength, it is not a desirable timber species. The wood is used locally for boxes, rough construction, and pallets and crates. The heartwood is often used for woodware because of its uniqueness of that flame color. Its fibrous root system and its prolific seeding habit make it desirable for use in erosion control in some parts of the world. It has also been used as shelter belts in the Great Plains. The sap can be used for the production of maple syrup, although the sugar content is typically lower in box elder sap than sugar maple sap. The national champion box elder, as of 2021, is in Frederick County, Maryland. It's 222 inches in circumference, 69 feet tall, with an 83-foot crown spread. The Kentucky champion box elder is in Letcher County. It is 152 inches in circumference, 55 feet tall, with a 52-foot crown spread. If you'd like to know more about national champions, check out American Forest National Champion Trees or check out the Kentucky Division of Forestry Champion Trees. Now for a few fun facts about box elder. Box elder is also called ash leaf maple because the leaves resemble the leaves of an ash tree. Native Americans used the cambium for food and boiled down the sap for syrup and candy. Box elder was first cultivated in 1688, and there are several cultivars and varieties available commercially. The scientific genus name Acer is from the Latin acro, which means sharp in reference to the leaf shape, or it can be from the Celtic oc, which means hard in reference to maple wood. And the species name Nugundo is a Latinized form of the Malayan name for Vitex nugundo, or Chinese chase tree, because the two species have similar looking leaves. I hope you get the opportunity to get out into your woodlands, a local park or neighborhood, and enjoy the beautiful local trees, including box elder.
Well, thank you, Lori. We greatly appreciate that presentation. And, you've always heard leaves of three, let them be,
Yeah.
So I was like, when you said 3 leaves, I was like, oh.
And it's true. I mean, it's one of those species that if you're not looking closely, you see those 3 leaves, people automatically go, oh, it's poison ivy, which is why that's one of the species that can be confused with. But on closer investigation, as you're looking at it, you'll notice that it's not. But don't touch anything with 3 leaves until you know that it's not poison ivy. So, yeah.
Better safe than sorry.
I know. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Exactly. Well, we thank you for doing that again. We love those every week. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Laurie.
Go ahead.
I was just going to mention to folks that, if you like this, Laurie's got, 60 some trees or more. These videos that are available for your consumption. And I know they're very popular. They're some of our most popular YouTube videos that we have from our whole department. So check all those out if you've missed any of the trees of the week. That's all.
Yeah, and we've done most of the maples. I think we've got just a few that are we don't find them a lot in the state that I haven't done, but most of the rest of the maples have been done. So yeah, check them out. There's lots of good information there.
Yeah. Trees are the answer, Renee.
No matter what the question, that's what you tell me.
No. Another great show. Really a big thanks to Dr. Chris Barton and Dr. Ellen Crocker and Laurie Thomas for their segments. Really appreciate their contributions. I enjoyed it. Hope you did too.
Definitely. Oh, I did. And if I know we give you so much information every week. And so you can always go back to our website at fromthewoodstoday.com and you can watch our shows over and over and over again to your heart's content. But all of our shows are listed there. And so you can watch them. And then we even have a survey there if you want to fill it out.
Yeah, let us know what you'd like to see, or just tell us any comments about the show, and we'll certainly take those to heart. And we appreciate you all being part of this on a weekly basis, whether you join us live or via the recordings or the podcast. Thank you so much, and please help us spread the word.
Definitely. Again, so each Wednesday we are here live at 11 o'clock, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
From the woods today.